share with you some preliminary findings from our qualitative study that's been undertaken as part of the MESARC project. This presentation is about narratives of risk, resilience and recovery amongst culturally diverse participants. This qualitative study is nested within a larger research project. It was designed to complement the other parts of the MESARC research project. Through this nested qualitative study, we wanted to gain a richer understanding of people's resilience and their recovery following sexual abuse and violence. We wanted to identify barriers and enablers to accessing care and support. We also wanted to explore underserved communities in particular. You can see the different characteristics we're focusing on this slide. We are aiming to have 50 conversations with people from MESARC and within the community. However, in today's presentation, we will focus on those identified as culturally, ethnically, and linguistically diverse. So our approach. How did we have these conversations and collect this data? We adopted an approach that is known as storytelling. Before I elaborate further, I just want to flag, whilst terms like story and storytelling may be considered negative in this context, within this approach, storytelling is used as a way to gather powerful accounts and authentic voices that centre the survivor as the storyteller. It aims to empower participants. They get to start and finish where they see fit and express events and experiences in their own words. We wanted to know how patients accessed or did not access services and what were their experiences in an order and manner that was important to them, for them to tell us about. So, who took part? So far, we've had 12 participants from within the MESARC study that were self-identified as belonging to a culturally diverse background, and they were invited to speak with us. We adopted an approach that's known as narrative analysis to analyse the data that we collected. As part of this approach, we created 12 individual core stories. A core story explains what happened in the participant's own words without the researcher's validation. To do this, when participants told their stories, we took the essences of what was similar across the 12 stories and pulled them together to develop a composite. What's important here is that when we have these conversations, the order of importance in terms of events, accessing services, is all down to the individual that's telling us their story. And that was really, really important for this research. After we produce composites, what we're going to present to you today is composites that have got multiple core stories within a single story. And what they do is capture pivotal events collectively with reference to participants' social, cultural, and historical contexts to really relay the essence of what participants' experiences are and hopefully move you into really getting an insight into what their experiences were like. Before we present to you the 3 composites that we've developed in this presentation, I want to share with you some of the characteristics of the voices that the composites will represent. As you can see, 12 people took part, 11 female, 1 non-binary person. People were aged between 19 to 36, half had a faith, and participants were from a range of cultural backgrounds, which the majority were from a mixed heritage, as you can see on the screen. We will now present 3 composites. So the first composite we have is familia. This represents several participants' reflections about their culture this represents their reflections about how their cultural background played in their risk of sexual assault and abuse.
I wonder why it happened. I'd love to know. People sexualize me as exotic, like, oh, you look like Princess Jasmine. The men have always said quite inappropriate things. I sometimes wonder whether being dual heritage did make a difference. Another part is, I think that young black girls are sexualized a fair bit more at young ages. And I think it's partly because of that sexualization and objectification that kind of happens disproportionately to black girls. Growing up, I've had to mature too soon and take on responsibilities a child my age normally would not. I felt different to others. I had quite a chaotic childhood. When I was relatively young, my dad estranged us and my mom fell very ill. So this left me as like the primary caregiver for my family here. So in fact, it has always been about mental health, but kind of not mine. Like, I guess I'm very used to not even thinking of how I am because I need to look after these three other people. I also guess, culturally, it's not something that we've ever discussed, and it's always perceived to be something that couldn't or wouldn't happen to us because of how we are quite reserved as people. Like the culture I come from, just the topic of sex and everything, it's one massive taboo. Children exist to serve parents, and the respect only works one way. My dad says these things are cultural. I'm not 100% convinced that they are. I know that these are things that do come up in the African culture, parent relationship and stuff. I always find that very difficult to process. It didn't really make sense to me. So me coming forward and reporting it was a huge betrayal to him. He was livid, he was mad, and he made it very clear that I was going against the cultural standards of basically keeping my mouth shut and serving him. Him being the important person in this situation, and that I was going to destroy his life, and that I was being selfish. I imagine those are normal reactions. I don't really know.
The second narrative that we've got, composite that we have here is Melia. So this represents several participants' reflection on resilience and the supportive influences their recovery journey, including some reflections on cultural background. The definition that we've taken for resilience is protective and vulnerability forces at multiple levels of influence: culture, community, family, and the individual.
My friends would be an immediate call to help. I think it was quite hard for me, especially culturally, having that conversation, that dialogue with friends. We don't openly speak about dating, romance. But I was surprised when I was met with support. I definitely relied more on friends. I couldn't tell my parents, which was quite a big deal, obviously, because you think your parents would be a really big support system for you. So that was really difficult. I've only told my siblings, but never my parents. I never can type thing. I remember speaking to the SARC and being really nervous and then feeling really listened to and validated and valued. I remember speaking to this woman called Anna. I remember weekly chats with her to slowly understand what I went through and what I could do about my options. She was the first person I spoke to before I was referred to other services. She was my person. I didn't want to report for a very long time. I'd seen the stats of how it is dealt with and how you're very unlikely to get to trial and stuff. I did have worries about my mental health more so than worries about my cultural background. I was worried that if we did go to trial, would I be able to handle it mentally? Would they believe me because I have bipolar disorder? It was quite easy reporting it, actually. I just phoned 101, then after several days, they sent over 2 officers. They took my details, filled in a form, then that got passed on to a detective. The police were surprisingly nice. They were gentle and were just like, we'll let you tell it, and didn't really demand any answers to things. My ISVA took all the control of communication with the police. She was very supportive in terms of the practical handling with the investigation and advocating for me. I think I would have really struggled without her. I guess if I consistently engaged with services more early on, I might be in a more healed state than I am now. It was hard for me to kind of engage with services as much as I wanted to. It's the underlying shame. I was still struggling to accept that it happened to me and felt that I was to blame. They had to give me a new psychiatrist. My new psych nurse, like our first get to know each other, basically went, oh, by the way, have you ever been assaulted or abused in the past? Surely, that's not the way you would word things. Surely you can understand that could be quite triggering for people. My GP is really good. Oh, your smear test is due this year as well. I started to panic. During the phone call, I was like, actually, I might find this a bit triggering. What can I do during the visit so I can be more comfortable and not freak out? Oh, you can bring a friend with you. They can hold your hand. And I was like, I didn't know. Nobody told me. I'm obviously not looking forward to the smear test, but I feel more comfortable with it. Part of my religious practice is that I would never cut my hair. He cut my hair. It was like breaking something that I hold very dear. The disrespect was on a different level. When I explained why it was a big deal, she said, oh, would you prefer a therapist that could understand your background? No, that wasn't the point I was trying to make. From that point, I became really uncomfortable. I should be able to explain and express, even if it is not of your culture. I welcome you to ask if you don't understand something. I actually think the therapist felt more uncomfortable than I did. My second counsellor was an Asian woman, and I did find that slightly easier to connect with. When I talked about very racialized aspects of life, I felt she could understand that. I don't have to explain everything about why my family are the way they are. So it was easy to build a connection, because if I were explaining like black women being seen as hypersexualized and struggling with that, I didn't feel like I was being judged. Not that the other counsellor would have done this, but I felt I could open up more. On our last one, she told me she was leaving, and my heart shattered. We met at a park because obviously COVID restrictions. She was like, look. She showed me sheets and she went, I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. You've done incredible. She even wrote me a card. Whenever I'm feeling at my worst, I would read it to myself because it meant so much that someone had taken that time. I can't explain how amazing she was, but she saved my life, truthfully.
Our third narrative is Zara. This represents several participants' reflections on their state of recovery and the things they believe indicate that they have achieved a level of recovery.
Sleep was quite a big one that I felt changed quite dramatically. I didn't sleep well at all. My sleep was very broken. And I would never wake up feeling rested, really. However, after I started going to church, I very much started having peaceful sleep and sleeping through the night. I wasn't having nightmares at all, and I'm still not. So that's been the biggest change, really. Obviously, sleeping better has affected my mental and my physical health, being a lot less irritable. I had an unhealthy relationship with food. I'd probably go through periods of binging, then sort of starving myself, and it didn't affect me physically. You couldn't see that it was happening. I wasn't gaining loads of weight or losing loads of weight. Again, the peace has just affected everything, where I just have peace about food. I just think about it so much less. And if I do have an evening where I eat maybe a little bit more than I should, I don't worry about it. It feels like hard work sometimes to stay okay, but I have lots of things I do to cope. I never thought of myself as a strong person, and it helped me to realise I actually am. Just being able to feel that in my body and thinking I am strong just kind of helps me. I exercise regularly, I run, do workouts, yoga, meditate, and keep a journal. They're all things that kind of help me. I've changed so much since then. I've come out. I've cut my hair. I don't even look like the same person. So that's quite a blessing. I talk to people, and I've told people. The support is there, but I don't like to make a deal out of it. Does that make sense? I'm like, this is my trauma. It is what it is. I can't take it back. I was obviously nervous to have another intimate relationship. I tried dating, but I didn't really like it at all. I was like, no, this is not for me. But then I met my ex-boyfriend, which was really great. He was a very sweet, gentle person. And I think that was a huge part of my healing journey. Actually, it was one of the most significant things that happened to me. I was getting into a really loving, kind, nurturing, patient relationship with someone who was just all over consent. He was someone that I could confide in. And later, he would always ask, do you want to? Or do you not want to? And err on the side of caution, saying, we're not doing anything at all until there's a green flag 100%. And it was just the most wonderful thing. Despite his flaws and the reason we broke up, that made me feel like I had autonomy again over what I was doing. I'd say the biggest change has probably been really peaceful. And that's something that I never really had from my childhood to being an adult. Peace was something I just didn't have. I feel really peaceful now. And that's led to other things like being able to let go of control and just calmer. Probably kinder, because in dealing with the trauma, I'd become selfish because I had to be selfless for so long, like supporting my parents. And I became quite bitter about that. And now I've come out the other side of it, where I can be more selfless again. But from a healthier perspective, a place where I'm not being forced to be selfless, but being it because I can be. So peace is the biggest thing. My husband and I are expecting in October. The trauma is still being a part of who I was and my past, but it's not defining me. Just visualise yourself, like light coming from your feet up to your head. Just your inner light bulb where you're protected and no one can hurt you.
Analysis, which I think are incredibly powerful. We've been working with that data for a number of weeks, and every time I hear them spoken, they become more powerful as narratives that talk to the experiences of our magnificent participants. So the voices that you heard represent people with cultural, linguistic, diverse characteristic, who have access to sexual assault referral centres. And obviously one of the things we know is that people with a minority characteristic of that nature get to SARCs in far fewer numbers than we would want them to. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to focus on those experiences. We will also and are talking to people with those kinds of characteristics who haven't found SARCs, who haven't accessed support that way, so that we can try to get a balanced perspective of those experiences as well. Our participants obviously shared very varied journeys of recovery. but some commonalities they had with the wider participants. We did hear similar stories about the very positive experiences at SARC and the very positive experiences that they have of engaging with ISVA support. And similarly to people with other characteristics, they also shared a mixed experience of other services such as police, counselling or NHS services. The extent to which their kind of cultural, ethnic or linguistic diversity played a part in their journey varies as well. You heard there things from what we were calling the risk narrative. Not everybody talked about risk, but we did hear references from them to objectification and over-sexualisation within their experiences. And we also heard things about cultural expectations and norms around parental relationships and the likelihood of discussing sex and relationships with friends, which they saw as relevant to their journeys and their experiences. And we also heard that their background could affect who they chose to disclose to in their lives, who they personally got support from in terms of family and friends and so on. But I think what we've really heard, at least in the data so far, we've got more work to do with this data set, is that feeling heard, feeling genuinely listened to is absolutely fundamental. I think that's been a bit of a theme for the day. Sometimes matching cultural background with somebody that you're getting therapy from can be useful for some people. I think probably a sort of recommendations, it's worth asking that question. But it's not necessary. And more important is somebody who's acting in a culturally competent way in their practice in terms of offering therapy and support. In terms of those reflections on reaching a state of recovery, I don't think we really heard at all that cultural background was particularly that relevant to that experience. Recovery looks and feels different for everybody. Everyone will have a different measure by which they will make that assessment for themselves, whether they feel they've got there or not. And I think the sort of final word is that we do get a sense of real hope from the narratives that we've pulled together from our participants so far. That there is hope, a strong sense of hope, that with good support people can get to a place that they feel is good recovery for them. So we'll leave you with that feeling of hope. Thank you very much for listening.